What you're about to watch is not based on TV. It's not a dramatization. This is the actual legal process, step by step, that a teenager goes through from the moment law enforcement takes them into custody on a felony charge all the way to the moment a judge sends them to a locked facility. Every stage, every term, every decision point. Let's get into it. It begins on the street, in a school hallway, or in someone's living room. A law enforcement officer takes a youth into custody on suspicion of a felony offense. In legal terminology, juveniles are not arrested, they are taken into custody. The distinction matters because the juvenile system was designed, at least in theory, around rehabilitation, not punishment. But the handcuffs feel the same either way. The moment a juvenile is taken into custody, constitutional protections attach. Thanks to the 1967 Supreme Court ruling in re Gault, law enforcement must advise the youth of their Miranda rights before any questioning. If they don't, anything the youth says can be thrown out in court. The arresting officer then has three options: release to a parent, issue a civil citation, or transport to a detention facility. For a felony charge, transport is almost always the outcome. At the intake center, a probation officer conducts an initial screening. This is not a hearing, it's an administrative gatekeeping process, the system's first real look at who this youth is and what happens next. From this screening, three paths exist: informal adjustment, diversion, or formal petition. For a felony charge, formal petition is the standard outcome. Here's where something important happens. A standardized risk assessment instrument is administered. Tools like the YLS-CMI or the Ohio Risk Assessment System. The youth is scored across criminal history, family circumstances, education, peer associations, substance use, and attitudes. That score follows the youth through every single stage that follows. Now the intake officer has to decide: does this youth get locked up while the case moves through the courts, or do they go home? Detention is not automatic, even for felonies. The legal standard is whether detention is necessary to protect the community, prevent the youth from failing to appear, or ensure the youth's own safety. If the youth is detained, federal law requires a detention hearing within 24 to 72 hours. At that hearing, a juvenile court judge reviews the offense, the youth's history, and the intake information. The youth has the right to an attorney. For serious felonies, armed robbery, aggravated assault, sexual battery, judges frequently order continued detention.
If the case proceeds formally, the prosecutor's office files a delinquency petition with the juvenile court. This is the functional equivalent of criminal charges. The petition doesn't say the youth committed a crime, it says the youth committed a delinquent act. The language is different, the consequences are not. The petition specifies the offense, the date, and the factual allegations. It's the document that formally opens the case in juvenile court. For serious felony charges, the court has to ask a critical question: does this case even belong in juvenile court? Transfer to adult court can happen three ways: judicial waiver. A judge holds a full hearing and weighs the youth's age, prior record, and rehabilitation potential. The standard comes from Kent v. United States, 1966. Prosecutorial direct file. In some states, the prosecutor can bypass the judge and file directly in adult court. And statutory exclusion. Certain offenses like homicide or repeat violent felonies automatically go to adult court by law. If the case is not transferred, it continues in juvenile court. Hold on, before we go any further, if this is already blowing your mind and you're learning things about the juvenile justice system that nobody ever told you, hit that like button right now. Seriously, most people have no idea any of this exists, and you're halfway through the real process. If you've got a family member in the system, work with youth, or just want to understand how this country handles its youngest offenders, subscribe to Juvenile Justice Decoded. Hit the bell so you never miss a breakdown, and drop a comment below. Tell me what stage of this process surprised you the most. Now let's finish this. The youth appears before the juvenile court judge. The petition is read aloud. Through their attorney, the youth enters a plea, an admission, or a denial. Those are the juvenile equivalents of guilty and not guilty. A denial sets the case on the path to an adjudicatory hearing. This is the juvenile trial. And here's one of the biggest differences from adult court. There is no jury. A judge alone decides the facts. The prosecutor presents evidence. The defense challenges it.
Witnesses testify. The rules of evidence apply. The standard of proof is the same as adult court, beyond a reasonable doubt, affirmed by the Supreme Court in re Winship, 1970. If the judge finds the allegations proven, the youth is adjudicated delinquent. Not a criminal conviction on paper, but a formal legal finding that carries real, lasting consequences. Following adjudication, the probation department builds a pre-dispositional report, family background, school records, psychological evaluations, substance use history, victim impact, and that risk score from intake. The probation officer includes a recommendation for what should happen next. This report becomes one of the most influential documents in the entire process. The judge reads it before sentencing. The disposition hearing is sentencing. The judge hears from the prosecutor, defense counsel, the youth, the family, and often the victim. Then they weigh rehabilitation potential against community safety. Options run on a continuum: fines and community service at the least restrictive end, moving up through formal probation, treatment programs, residential placement, and at the top, commitment to a secure juvenile correctional facility operated by the state's Department of Juvenile Justice. For a youth adjudicated on a serious felony with a high risk score, prior history, and failed interventions, commitment is where this ends. The judge issues a commitment order. The youth is transferred from the detention facility to a state-operated secure commitment program. This is a locked facility. Programming inside typically includes education toward a GED, vocational training, substance abuse treatment, mental health services, and structured behavioral programming. Length of stay depends on the offense and the state. Some use fixed terms, others use indeterminate sentences with periodic reviews. From the moment of arrest to the door of that facility, intake, detention, petition, transfer review, arraignment, adjudication, investigation, disposition. Every step had a procedure. Every step had a form. And at the end of it, a teenager in a locked room, waiting to find out whether the system built to rehabilitate him actually can. If you learn something from this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Most people moving through this system have no idea what's actually happening to them or why. That's a problem. Like this video, subscribe to Juvenile Justice Decoded, and drop your questions in the comments. Every question you ask becomes the next breakdown we build. We'll see you in the next one.